Well, it looks like there's a showdown looming between the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Kevin Page, and the Parliamentary Librarian, William Young. Page's mandate is to provide independent reports on the state of the country's finances, and his office is ready to release an assessment of the country's fiscal and economic health. Page had hoped to release his report before Finance Minister Jim Flaherty's economic update, expected at the end of this month. But now the Parliamentary Librarian, William Young, has issued an order which seriously restricts what Page's office can do and say. Joining us now to discuss all of this, Conservative Senator Hugh Segal. Senator Segal, good to see you. Let me ask you your reaction to a letter now from the Parliamentary Librarian, William Young, to Kevin Page, who is, as you know, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, telling him he can't release anything unless he gets Young's approval. And that, of course, comes from the Speaker's support for Mr. Young being Page's boss. And I know you don't approve of that. So what's your reaction to this latest development?
Well, let me say I think the librarian's letter is both regrettable and unhelpful. I don't think the librarian wants to be known as the Chief Secrecy Officer for Canada, and I don't think he wants to put himself in the role of violating the spirit of the accountability legislation passed by both houses and by many hard hours of committee work in both places. Now, to be fair to the Librarian of Parliament, the law would seem to imply, as it is presently drafted, that Kevin Page and the Chief, the Parliamentary Budget Officer is, because he's in the Library of Parliament as a place of location, he is under the authority of the Chief Librarian. I don't think anybody who worked on the bill, passed the bill, debated the bill, believed they were creating one more analyst to seek the approval of the librarian before matters could be made public. I think they were creating, we all felt we were creating, both on the elected side and on the Senate side, a budget officer who would provide clarity and information on a timely basis so parliamentarians could discharge their Magna Carta duties relative to the King's expenditure of other people's tax money. And I think the librarian is getting himself in the middle of a situation, if I may say so, in an unnecessarily harsh, narrow and small-minded way. What he should be doing is taking the issue of how the jurisdiction should be sorted out to an open parliamentary committee, and there's a joint committee on the Library of Parliament, which is staffed by both members and senators, so it can be worked out in public in a way that is fair. He should not be trying to suppress the freedom of the Parliamentary Budget Officer to do the job that he is clearly intended to do. Now, if there's a difficulty in the law, let's address that, but let's not issue edicts from on high to violate the right of parliamentarians to get financial information on a timely basis.
Well, but I go to your point. The spirit and the letter of the law seem to be different, and the Parliamentary Librarian is emboldened in his letter to the budgetary officer by a letter he received from not one but two speakers, the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Commons, telling him he was the boss. So it seems to me the Speaker, including the Speaker of the Senate, who's a member of your party, Senator Segal, doesn't agree with you.
Well, and I respectfully disagree with them. I disagree with the Speaker of the Senate, whose authority I both recognize and celebrate. The Speaker of the House is yet to be re-elected Speaker, so he should not be trying to commit members of Parliament who've just been re-elected or newly elected to a policy which he doesn't have a mandate to discharge. It's for MPs to decide who the next Speaker is. That being said, I think that if there is a dispute, it should not be dealt with by fiat. It should be dealt with by an open committee for everybody to see. Nobody has anything to hide, and if the librarian continues to proceed in this fashion, he is making himself part of the problem as opposed to part of the solution. And even the legislation that anticipated that he would be in charge of the operation assumed he'd be part of the solution. He's making himself part of the problem. I don't think that's his intent, but that's the impact of what he's doing.
Would it be helpful for the Prime Minister or for the government House Leader or someone important in the Harper government to spell out the view of the government, because this office was created as a campaign promise in the 2006 election, followed through in the accountability legislation, and maybe if the spirit were understood better, the speakers, plural, might reverse their position on how this whole system should operate.
Well, Don, you will recall during the campaign when there was a question about whether the request by the MP for Ottawa Centre, Mr. Dewar, to release data relative to the total cost of the Afghan mission, emerged, the Prime Minister was asked, and he said he had no objection to be made public at all. So he's already stated his view. He is for public exposure, public accountability. He's always been for that. That's always been his approach in terms of reforming the administration of government. So I think he said enough for Parliament to act accordingly, and certainly the opposition leaders share a common interest with the Prime Minister in this kind of openness.
So when Parliament resumes next week, Senator Segal, I assume this is going to surface, and I would assume that perhaps Senator Hugh Segal will be one of those to make sure it does.
Well, I certainly will be urging our colleagues in the Senate to convene the librarian and the Parliamentary Budget Officer before a committee as soon as possible to resolve this in open, amicably, but directly, so that the voter, the taxpayer, wins out on the issue of transparency.
Senator Hugh Segal in Winnipeg today at the Conservative Convention. Thanks for this.
Thank you.